Awesome. All right. So where we're going to be picking up is on page 35. And we're going to have a look at our first example. So our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. So just to contextualize where we're at and what's going on, page 35, second full paragraph. And so as we go through the chapter more about alcoholism, what we're doing is we are having a laser beam into the power of our illness. We're trying to see examples of the mental obsession. And our first guy, Jim, we're going to see if we can see him go through the cycle of alcoholism, but where we very much want to focus on and laser beam focus on is the mental obsession. We want to see what is the thought that he has before he takes the drink. Because if we can see that in our lives, we see the powerlessness that we have over our illness. So let's go talk about our homie Jim. He doesn't have to be your homie, but he's one of mine. Or as Rob is probably frantically trying to put into the chat, his name is Ralph. Ralph Furlong. Ralph. And I don't know if there's ever a good, I think Ralph's the one where the only picture of him is like sort of like a quarter of the. Ooh, Rob might have a picture of Ralph. And so we can all have a look and see if we would swipe left or. Oh, go ahead, Rob. Go ahead. Yeah.
I thought I had a picture of Ralph. I thought,
Yeah.
but then it's been pointed out that and they're
Ralph.
not, it's not confirmed. So I have stopped showing it. So I do
No.
apologize.
No, don't apologize. No, Ralph is a man of mystery. I was going to ask if we were going to swipe right or left on him as if it was Tinder. Uh, and he is a man of mystery. So don't you feel bad about nothing. Alrighty. And when we get to Fred, we got a picture of Fred. I made a whole little thing for him. So our first example is a friend that we shall call Jim. Ralph. Yeah, he's invisible as well as anonymous. International man of mystery. All right. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. So here's this guy, spoilers, alcoholic. And he's got a charming spouse and a wonderful family. Anyone here ever think, no, 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 I can't be an alcoholic? Look at my spouse. Look at my, yeah, we got Roland Arthur, Ralph Furlong, all of the info in the chat. Uh, but our guy Ralph, Jim, he's got a charming wife and family. Anyone ever use like family or a spouse or I'm married? See, I'm not that bad. Alcoholics don't get married and have kids. So we're trying to punch through that delusion. It says when it says he inherited a lucrative automobile agency, what that means is he became the owner of a car dealership. And it was either through his family, I don't know the details, but I'll make them up. But it was either through his family, like his father owned this car automobile agency and it was passed along to him, or maybe through marriage. But at some point, he began to be the owner of a lucrative automobile agency. So he's the owner of this car dealership, and this car dealership is making money. Anyone ever use our career and making money? Is it, no, no, I couldn't have this illness. No, no, I'm not this thing because I'm making money. So it's lucrative. It says he had a commendable World War record. So in the First World War, he carried himself with dignity and he was a man of courage and honor. And it says he is a good salesman. So he's a productive member of society. Can't relate. But, you know, our guy Jim, he can. And again, he's still an alcoholic. Everybody likes him. Goodness gracious, what's not to like? Huh? This enigma of a man. Some of us are like, oh, I'll swipe on him, you know. And it says everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. And I want to pause right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share the screen a little. Because as we go through Jim's story, what we're trying to see is his example of the cycle. And when it talks about Jim having this nervous disposition, what are we talking about? Well, I believe what we're pointing to is the spiritual malady. We're pointing to that spiritual sickness. This guy, Jim, when he is separated from alcohol, he has a feeling of anxiety. Now, if you're like me, which, I mean, if we're hanging out on Monday to Tuesday morning for those overseas, you're probably a little like me, which means hopeless, glad you're here. But when it talks about him having a nervous disposition, what that means is on the face of it, on the surface of it, he is a guy that appears to be a little bit nervous. And do you guys know what it's like to try to show up and you appear a little bit nervous, but on the inside, you're having an absolute anxiety meltdown just trying to hold it together? I'm sure, yeah, I'm seeing some nods, right? And so, what I believe we're pointing to there is his spiritual malady. And the spiritual malady, it's important. It is not diagnostic of alcoholism or addiction or whatever brings you to this all-inclusive study. It's not diagnostic of it. But it is helpful to understand that that is what we are going to treat. Because that spiritual malady is a conscious sense of separateness from God. And I didn't think it was that when I got here. If you told me that, I'd be like, you're out of your mind. But that's what it is, and that's what we're going to treat. But as we get to Fred's story, we're going to see that Ralph, our guy Jim, he's a little spiritually unwell. He's a little off the beam. He's a little disturbed. You know, he's a little crunchy. But when we get to our guy Fred, we're going to see that he doesn't have these manifestations. And so we can see somebody like Jim who is riddled with the spiritual malady, and it's going to be obvious. If it's not apparent, it'll be apparent soon. But even with somebody like Fred, where it's not apparent, still the mental obsession will come. And that is the crux of our problem. So it says he's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for nervous disposition. If you're making a note in your book, feel free to write the spiritual malady. It says he did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated, he had to be committed. And I want to point something out. If I am somebody who has the ability to control the amount that I drink, I am stopping before committed to an asylum, and I'm stopping before physical violence. And if you're wondering, Paige, were you able to stop before those things? Nope. I've had the police take me to the psych ward while I was on a bender. I am somebody who has the physical allergy. And it seems to be that so does Jim. Most people, in fact, any human being that has the ability to control the amount they drink would stop before violence or hospitalization. And so if we're writing in our book, when it says in a few years he became so violent when intoxicated he had to be committed, you can make a note that what we're talking about there is the physical allergy. All right. So it says, on leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. And so what they would have done is they would have laid down what they knew of alcoholism, which is the step one. And in step one, what they would have likely focused on was the allergy of the body, that once I start to drink, I cannot control the amount that I take, but also the obsession of the mind. That when I am sober and I say, I do not want to drink again, that has no effect. And the reason we focus on those two characteristics in step one is because that is what separates me from non-alcoholics. We're going to treat the spiritual malady, but in step one, I got to focus on what's different. And so it then goes on to say, we told them what we knew of alcoholism, physical allergy, mental obsession, and the answer that we had found. And the answer that we find, the answer that we have, is a spiritual awakening. That is our solution, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. Another way to say it is that they laid down the foundation of step two. This idea that could there be a power that is more powerful than the obsession of the mind? Is it possible that there could be a power that will relieve me of the insanity to take that first drink or drug or whatever brings you to this all-inclusive study? So that's what it's talking about. Then it says, so they laid down the information of step one, laid down the information of step two. So problem, physical allergy, mental obsession, solution, spiritual awakening. I'm just repeating it because if you're like me, I would have written some of it and then got distracted and not written all of it. So I'm repeating it for those that didn't get a chance if they wanted to write it down. It says he made a beginning. He made a beginning. Now, I will tell you that without a shadow of a doubt, what does that mean in contemporary 12-step rooms? Well, that means I made a third step decision, which is a decision to work these steps, and then promptly sat on my fourth step and did not do anymore. That is in modern 12-step what that means. And I'll stop the screen share for a little bit. So that's often what that means. And I know nobody on this Zoom call could ever relate to that. But he made a beginning can look like just sitting on a fourth step. But he made a beginning can also look like did his fifth step, but didn't continue to go and make amends. He made a beginning can look like he made some of his amends, but not all of his amends. He made a beginning can look like he did all of this work and then promptly stopped living this way of life. See, this is a way of life. It's not a set it and forget it deal. It's not something that I do for 30 days and then I put it down. So he made a beginning at this way of life. But what is important to understand is these 12 steps, not a set it and forget it program. These 12 steps are how I need to live my life. This becomes a way of life. And he made a beginning means he didn't keep doing. He made a start and then a stop. And I can't stay well on old actions. I can't stay well on things that I have previously done. I need to continue to do. So his family was reassembled. So wonderful. He's got oh no, I forgot to turn off the reactions. Uh-oh, that'll go bad when I'm like halfway through and I'm getting the laser beams and they're like, rock on, you know? But his family was reassembled. And he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. I want to point something about this out. He used to be the head honcho. He was the owner. He was running the whole show. But through the inability to control his drinking, he got fired or kicked out of the, like, I guess you don't get fired, but I mean, he got kicked out of running the whole show. And now he's showing up to work as a salesman, which in a car dealership is pretty close to bottom of the like corporate ladder there. He used to be the owner. Now he's showing up as a salesman for the exact same company he used to own. Oh, oh, you know, I don't know about you guys. Maybe you guys are spiritual giants, but I'm telling you, I'd be showing up like, listen, this is how they're doing it wrong, and it was better when I was in charge, and they don't know what they're doing. They're talking out of their butt, you know. I'd be all over how they're doing it wrong and how they need to do it better. And I'm sure that you guys are way, way more spiritual than me. But I would have been absolutely riddled with resentments. Just, oh, you know, just, oh, and every day about how they're doing it wrong. And I used to run the thing. And if they only knew, you know, maybe you don't. Maybe you guys are just perpetually on the beam. But let me tell you, you got a sicko over here that gets it. So all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And that is an important line. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Because before I come to the rooms of 12 step, there is one reason for relapse. One reason, and one reason only for me to relapse before I come to the rooms of 12 step. And that one reason is the inevitability of the relapse. I'm going to relapse. That is the step one idea that I will relapse. I will drink again. I will use again. I will take that first compulsive bite. I will act out in control. I will text my ex. I will, place that bet, whatever brings you to this study. I will relapse. I don't got to figure out why. It is inevitable. But once I come to the rooms of 12 step, there is one other reason for relapse, and we saw it right here. A failure to grow spiritually. Once I come to the rooms of 12 step and I am approached by those who are properly armed with facts about themselves, not better than me, not smarter than me, but people who are armed, who understand what this illness is, and I understand what my illness is. The only other reason for relapse is I did not take the action or continue to take the action to allow me to live sober, to allow me to have that spiritual awakening. That's it. And I really like hammer home this, and I'm harping on this like a harpy, but I'm talking about this because it is that simple. It is that simple. And when I can see it's that simple, man, that allows me to direct my energies with what I need to do. What do I need to do? I got to go work these 12 steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. Because that is the way that we have found to have that spiritual awakening. That is how we grow spiritually. So before I come to the rooms of 12 step, there is one reason for relapse, and it is the mental obsession, the inevitability of my relapse. And after I come to the rooms of 12 step, there is one other reason, a failure to grow spiritually. And we're going to see it. We're going to see it in our guide, Jim. And it says, it says, all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. So half a dozen is six. 6 quick relapses, relapse, going through that cycle, swearing off, I'm never going to do it again, but not fully taking the action to bring about that spiritual awakening. And the mental obsession comes and he does it again. The mental obsession comes and he does it again. The mental obsession comes and he does it again. Oh yeah, Rob's got the definition. Consternation is amazement, confusion. Like if you, man, we've done this. You guys know what it's like when you're really focusing on work or focusing on family, or you're hitting 90 meetings in 90 days, and you pick up a drink or a drug or an addictive behavior, whatever brings you to the study, and you relapse, and you're like, how the heck did that happen? It's a failure to grow spiritually. And it points out he's focusing on work, he's focusing on family. Human power is not sufficient. Human power cannot and will not keep me sober. So it says on each of these occasions we worked with him. And I'll point that out. They're working with him. They're carrying this message to him. They're not like, well, are you done yet? They're not saying, well, you've relapsed, so I can't help you. Each and every time they're trying to lay down this foundation, this information. Now, and I will point that out. That might not been because of their own goodness of their heart, but their own desperate need to carry this message to another person. But they're showing up. Yeah, bottom of 35, because I don't go quickly. No, you're not calling me out on anything. I'm calling me out on things. I'm like, listen, I'm not Speedy Gonzalez over here. I'm Slowy Gonzalez. Yeah. All right. So they worked with him. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic. Again, what does it mean to be a real alcoholic? To have the physical allergy that once I start, I cannot stop. That once I start, more often than not, I have that thing inside of me that sets off and I need more. And the more that I do, the more I need. I start and the louder that more gets. You guys know what I'm saying? I think you do. I think you do. And then to have the obsession of the mind. That when I come to morning after, I'm never going to do it again. I get a thought that takes me back a day, a week, a month later, and I do it again. That's it. He agrees. He has those. And then he's in serious condition. He gets it. It's in trouble. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. And so if you're writing in your book, we can make a little note. Where we're at in the cycle right here is the swearing off, that firm resolution not to drink again. He knows he's an alcoholic. He knows he has to stay sober. He knows he needs to stay sober. He needs to keep his job. He doesn't like Nobody's a fan of us. I shouldn't say nobody's a fan of asylums, but the most of us are not looking for a grippy sock vacation, although sometimes I'm like, oh, I could use a break. And I do like no slip socks. That's just for safety. But he knows he doesn't want to go to the asylum. It comes with pain and suffering and humiliation. And he's going to lose his family and he's going to lose his job. And he wants to stay sober. So this is him swearing off. Let's turn the page. Yet he got drunk again. And so what inevitably kicked in for him was the mental obsession, the obsession of the mind. And that's what we're talking about. So I'll stop the share. And we'll go and we'll have a look. Let's see if we can find out where that kicks in for him. So it says, yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. And when we're working with sponsees, I'll throw something out just from my experience, especially if we're trying to move with them quickly through the steps. It can be, if we're trying to move with them quickly through the steps, it can be helpful to take them through their examples of their cycle. When they've said they're never going to do it again, take their last few relapses through the cycle. But I also, helpful plug for Howard on Thursday, window of opportunity. Come check it out. The same Zoom code, the same Zoom password, the same time. An announcement in the middle of the big book study. Yep, because I have undiagnosed ADHD already. So yet he got drunk again. So when we asked him to tell us exactly how it happened, so it can be helpful when I'm working with new people, especially if I don't have time to take them through line by line, to help them share with them my examples from my life of the cycle and have them share with me their examples, especially if they have been relapsing their last few relapses through this cycle. And the reason it can be so helpful is because if I can see that I am on this cycle, I can see that it is hopeless. I can see that I don't have a way out except for that spiritual awakening. And I can see the hopelessness and the powerlessness that I find myself in. So this is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I always like to make the joke, I wonder what happened to Monday. Anyone? What happened to Monday? What's going on there? He says, I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. Anyone here ever have a little bit of an irritation? Now, if you're wondering, what is an irritation? What is to be irritated? It's resentment. It's a resentment. And I have this thing, I didn't grab it ahead of time. But I have this thing where I'll work with sponsees and they're like, no, Paige, it's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated. You know what I mean? And then so I made, I'm sure Rob's looking for it right now. I'm going to toss it in the chat. I made these resentment columns that are like, it's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated. So I'm just a little frustrated resentment columns. And so if I was Jim's sponsor, I'd be like, man, I'll get you to do I'm just a little irritated, but nothing serious columns, That's what I would have them do. And it is an interesting thing. And maybe you guys have been there, but I've worked with sponsees and they got a resentment just like this. And they say, well, Paige, it's not going to take me out. And I'm like, girl, and I only say that when I'm working with my male sponsees, girl, I want you to know that we don't have the ability to choose what is going to take us out or not. I don't have the power of choice. I don't have the ability to choose. And so often that pebble in the shoe that I'm rolling around with all day. And that is what cuts me off from God. It is not the resentment that gets me drunk. It is the resentment that leads to the separateness from God, separateness from a power greater than myself. That is what leads me back to drinking. So, or drugging, or whatever brings you to this all-inclusive study. So nothing serious, though, nothing serious. And then it says, I had a few words with the boss. Now this also, nothing serious. Has anyone here ever had a few words with the boss? I don't know about you. Maybe you guys handle that better. But I have that immediate, like I'm called to the principal's office and I'm like, I did something wrong. And I am immediately imagining all the ways that I was fired. And listen, if you're like me and off the beam, not only am I imagining all the ways I'm going to get fired, I'm going to imagine all the ways it's their fault. And I got people to throw under that, that firing, but you know what I mean? Like, no. And so nothing serious though, just a few words with the boss. Nothing serious, and keep in mind, we're going to go to Fred, and Fred, not a cloud on the horizon. So it says, then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. I will assure you, I am not a sales expert, especially with vehicles. This is not my area of expertise. But apparently, this was not a super weird thing to be doing. A lot of times we'll read that and it'll be like, let's go to the country and see one of your prospects for a car. Okay, there, buddy. But keep in mind, we're in the 1930s, where not everyone, especially in the country, has access to a vehicle. And in 2025, we probably just go have a look on like a website because I don't want to leave the house. But you'd go to a car dealership or like I don't know. My brain's like thinking of like car sales websites, and I'm like, shh, brain, no, we don't need to advertise for them. Shh, shh, quiet brain. But it doesn't seem so suspicious when we put it in the context of there's not transit. There's not buses or trains that are readily available in the rural United States in the 1930s. So if there was somebody who was possibly interested in purchasing a car, which today and even then, that's a pretty significant purchase. You might have to have a couple meetings to try to, sell them on this idea of purchasing a car. It's not crazy. It's not crazy. He's doing work. So on the way, I felt hungry. So I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. And I'm going to point something out. There's nothing crazy about this at this moment either. At this moment, there is nothing insane about this. And the reason is we don't have McDonald's or Burger King. There's no drive-throughs. He's driving in the rural, United States in the 1930s. He's hungry. And clearly, he didn't pack a lunch, so he's going to stop at a place. There's nothing crazy about this. So, and this is something I always want to point out. I had no intention of drinking. And that is important. Because a lot of times I'll work with sponsees and they might be doing some things like going to places that maybe they shouldn't before they're recovered. Or, calling the ex. And it's like, they're like, no, Paige. I have no intention of relapse. But my intention has no power. My desire to stay sober has no power. My need to stay sober has no power. My intention to stay sober has no power. There is no power in my intention. I can't stay sober based on my intention alone. Intention helps. But we all know what it's like to want to stay sober, to need to stay sober, to have to, and to relapse again. So I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. That's not crazy. That's a delightful way to enjoy a lunchtime meal. That's great. We're not anti-sandwich over here. Have a sandwich. That's great. So I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place. It sounds like he's also trying to, when people go and have business dinners and they're trying to expense it. I will say that might sound like he's trying to expense it just a little bit. But fair enough, he's a sales guy, right? So he's gonna, see and keep in mind in the 1930s, the only way they could like sort of avoid each other and not talk to each other was reading a newspaper. So they didn't have screens to scroll to avoid conversation. So he could probably make some conversation and work his way into selling that car. So I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. So there's nothing crazy about this. There's nothing insane about this. He'd been there sober. It's a completely reasonable place for him to be. And it says, I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. And I'm going to point something out. Still no thought of drinking. I had no thought of drinking, no intention of drinking. And then it says, I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. And the only time that has ever raised any red flags is when I was working with a sponsee who was in Overeaters Anonymous. And she was like, oh, there's the allergy for us, But for most people, 2 sandwiches, he's going to stop at 2 sandwiches and another glass of milk. Nothing crazy there. He's going out. He's living his life. Nothing crazy suddenly. Suddenly. And we can underline suddenly, because I want to point something out that we do not have an effective mental defense against suddenly. I don't have any willpower that I can put between suddenly. There is no playing the tape to the end against suddenly. There is no thinking of the consequences against suddenly. I can't call my sponsor when suddenly hits, suddenly. And what we're going to see is the thought crossed my mind. The thought crossed his mind, not the drink crossed his lips. Before I take a drink, before I take a drug, there always has to be a thought. And that thought is the mental obsession. So if you're writing in your book today, suddenly the thought crossed my mind, that is the mental obsession. Now keep in mind, this is a man who had been to Alcoholics Anonymous, who had been working with good AAs that were taking him through explaining. Man, their voices were hoarse from explaining the mental obsession to this guy. You've got a mental obsession, you've got a mental obsession. And in this moment, he cannot even see that he's got it. He cannot see that he's insane. In this moment, the thought crosses his mind, and that is it. He's done. You see, in this moment, there's nothing that he can do. There's nothing. That is the power of the mental obsession. Suddenly, it's on him. So it says, suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey into my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. Now, I will point out there are times where I'm like, I've read that and I'm like, ooh, I'm thinking that like the milk would probably curdle, and I get a little judgy. I'm like, gross. And then I forget that there's lots of alcoholic beverages with milk. I mean, that's what Kahlua is, and like White Russians, and there's lots of that. But I immediately get judgmental, which is not cool. Stop judging Jim. He's had a hard enough go. He lost the automobile agency that was very lucrative, and his wife and kids are about to abandon him. Paige, cut him a break. Sorry, I won't judge him for his milk consumption. It's a lot of milk, though. Alrighty. It says, I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. Now, keep in mind that whiskey and the milk, I'm teasing, I'm making fun of, but I guarantee I have done things just as stupid as whiskey and milk. And it's not stupid. It is the power of the mental obsession. I cannot see what is true from what is false. Absolutely. He had a milk problem. He's got to go to MAA, Milk Addicts Anonymous. Which I really do enjoy cheese, so I don't know if I'm ready to go to any of the sister fellowships for Milk Addicts Anonymous. Although a lot of people who have lactose intolerance, they have an affinity for milk products, which is God bless them. There's so many people that will like, oh, I'm having another ice cream, and I'm like, oh, and they're like, I'm lactose, and I'm like, okay, no judgment, no judgment. You do you, boo. I get you. All right. So it says, I ordered a whiskey and poured it into more milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. So yeah, this faint just this hint of this might not be a good idea, just a wisp of it. But felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. In this moment, he cannot see what is true, and he's even having a little bit of, hey, this might not be a good idea. And I'm going to make sure I share the screen, but the obsession is on him. Now, this right here is the obsession of the mind. Told him, whiskey, put an ounce of whiskey into my milk, it could not hurt me. It goes on to say the experiment went so well. Now, when we talk about the experiment going well, that is the ease and comfort that we get from that first drink. Ooh, it is easy and comfortable. Oh, that experiment, it goes, why was I worried? Ah, you know that feeling. So the experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. And what we're seeing in that moment is the physical allergy. And that's often what the physical allergy looks like. It looks like, well, that didn't bother me. I'll just have another, just one more. You know what? Let's have shots. It looks like that, and we can't see it, but he is trapped. It's got him. Just like the mental obsession has got him. The allergy, now that he's taken the drink, has got him. So it says, thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. So that is his spree. And keep in mind, the spree's only got one destination for somebody like me, and it's an asylum or pretty close to, that is the tracks on the train are only leading one way, and it is downhill, baby. So here was the threat of commitment. The loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. So we can look at our own life and say, hey, did I ever have the threat of being committed? Now, that might not have been solely a psychiatric hold, although in Alberta, it's called being formed. We don't have the fancy California 5150s. Or wherever it is in the world. But I might have been locked up in an institution a time or two, because I am classy with my pinkies up and my finest grippy socks. It's actually not true. I not once have had grippy socks. They gave me little booties because they wouldn't give me my shoes back. This was when I could walk. And they didn't give me my shoes. I might have been a flight risk. Also, the laces. I get it. But I didn't get grippy socks. I got little booties, and I'm like, lame, Anywho, sorry, we don't need me to complain about my hospital fashion options, which I thought were sorely lacking. But have we had those threats of going back to detox, rehab, going to jail, going to prison, going to the emergency room, going to the psych ward, like losing our freedom? Have we had those threats and found ourselves doing it again? Here's the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position. What did I ever have looming over my head? The threat of losing family members, friends, loved ones, jobs, opportunities, hopes, dreams, far more than just my shoes or pants. And if you drank by me, you know what's up, right? To say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. That morning after feeling, whatever your substance is, there's not a good feeling the morning after. Not a good. And honestly, I switched my substances, especially near the end, because I did not like vomiting. Joke's on me. I developed a neurological condition in sobriety, and I vomited more in sobriety. That won't happen to you. I just thought that was a funny aside. Just joke's on me. All right. Anyway, so it said he had much, and so we know what it's like to have that pain and suffering and not want that. It said he had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. So imagine that Jim could come here on Zoom. I'm sure Ralph would have loved it, and he could break down the cycle for us and he could share with us examples from his own life of the cycle. I'm sure he could give a pinpoint accurate description of what the mental obsession looks like. And yet it was not enough to keep him sober. The book wouldn't have been written then, but I'm sure he could quote the book verbatim, even though it wasn't. It wasn't enough to keep him sober. So losing things, consequences, fear, the threats of losing everything that means anything to me, not enough to keep me sober. Self-knowledge, knowledge about myself, knowledge about my illness, knowledge about how I relate to this illness, not enough to keep me sober. It says, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he only mixed it with milk. All those consequences pushed aside for just put an ounce of whiskey in my milk. That is the power of this illness. It's more powerful than a mother's love, more powerful than the love of family, more powerful than the most promising business opportunity, more powerful than the most threatening consequence, more powerful than the pain and suffering of the humiliation, more powerful than the threat of losing my life, more powerful than my human mind. It is more powerful than me. All of that pushed aside to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk. It couldn't hurt me in a full stomach. That is the power of this illness. So it says, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. And if we're making a little note in our book, we can make a little note that what we're talking about is the mental obsession. That is plain insanity. That's what we're talking about, the mental obsession. Because whatever the definition is, we can look at our lives and that this substance, this behavior, this activity has burnt my life to the ground, caused pain, suffering, humiliation. I go back to it. That is the most insane thing that I could ever do. I'm realizing I have some slides that I have to bring up that I forgot to bring up ahead of time, so I'm trying to multitask. And we know that I am so good at that. Also, when it says, how can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? So to think straight is to see reality, and this lack of proportion, this inability to see reality as it is, be called anything else. And that lack of proportion of the ability to think straight, that is the mental obsession. All right, so it says, you may think that this is an extreme case. Now, I was judging his milk use, but for most of us, we're like, yeah, no, that doesn't seem that insane. That doesn't seem crazy. And it says, to us, it is not far-fetched for this kind of thinking. I want to emphasize thinking. The thinking in this context is the suddenly. This type of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We all know what it is like to say, I'm not going to drink again, or use again, or act out in this behavior again. Christy, are you drinking milk? That is amazing. Sorry. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm supposed to focus. Sorry. Nobody look at her. She doesn't want to be called out. Sorry. I love that I have the ability to pin a screen. I won't. I'm so sorry. And now people are like, I'm turning my camera off so she doesn't catch me doing things. I'm so sorry. So what we're talking about to us, this kind of thinking, not this type of drinking, the case of the suddenlies, that has been characteristic of every single one of us. Every single one of us has had experience with, I'm not going to drink again, or I'm not going to use again, or I'm not going to act out again, or I'm just not going to do it tonight, or for this occasion, or for, you know what I mean? Those softer swearings off, but we all know what it's like to say, I'm not going to do it and do it again. It's been characteristic of every single one of us. And if we have this experience, man, we are up against an illness over which we have no power. So it says, we have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea went out. The next day, we could ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity and how it could have happened. Now, this is a paragraph that has grown in meaning and importance for me over the years. And so this is just a little visual. We're going to get a lot of visual stuff happening uh, in this little period. I got props. And they're not, oh, I should, nope. I was going to I should do the props with the tiny hands. I shouldn't. I'm going to drop something and hurt myself. Okay. But what it's saying when it talks about the curious mental phenomenon running with that sound reasoning, running parallel, what it's saying is I put down the drink and I have two thoughts. And in this visual, we can see the personification of the mental obsession and the personification of our sound reasoning. Our sound reasoning is like that lady that's, of class said, I don't want to do it. I want to stay sober. I need to stay sober. And she's running a race. And the race is with the personification of the mental obsession. This time will be different. Nobody will ever know. And they are running in parallel and they are running a race. And what is important for me to understand with that our sound reasoning, their inevitably ransom, insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink, our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea went out. So what we are seeing here is that it is not a matter of if I relapse and when. You see, oftentimes in the rooms we hear things like, oh, it's not a race. It absolutely, without question, is a race. This is a race, and who I am racing is not you. What I am racing and what I am up against is the race of that mental obsession, the obsession of the mind. That is who I am racing. And man, it is not a matter of if I relapse and when. And so I was messing around with, getting some things made. And so that's one personification that I do feel like it fits that like Art Deco, Art Nouveau sort of style with the book. So I'm like, oh, that's delightful. So that is that personification. And when I see that I put down the drink, I put down the drug, I put down that addictive behavior, that race begins. And what we see is that it is only a matter of time before the mental obsession wins. That's what we're talking about. And when I see that, I begin to have a deep and profound understanding of what step one is talking about. And step one is not about if I relapse. Step one is about when I relapse. I will relapse and it will happen sooner than I think it will. And so this is one of the little images that I have. But how I first sort of visualize this, and if you are a visual learner, oh, this is a treat. And if you are annoyed by these slides, this is an absolute nightmare, and I apologize in advance. I always imagined, not always, but when I saw this paragraph and what it was really trying to say, the visual that came to my mind was the movie Tron. Is there anyone here that's seen the movie Tron? I haven't. I have not. I have not seen the original. I've not seen the remakes, but this is what comes to mind. And in that movie, they had those two motorcycles that were running a race. And so it's literally like I put down the substance and these two motorcycles are off. And they're both running parallel. So they're on this same track and they're running this race. But it is not a matter of if the insane idea will win. It is a matter of when the insane idea will win. The insane idea it's inevitable. It will win. And I just have that visual, like that insane idea it's got turbo boosters, it's got turbochargers. It is going to overtake. It does not matter. It does not matter the head start that my sound reasoning gets. Man, the insane idea is going to win. And apologies, because this is my last visual. I could not. I was doing this visual, and then Eileen sent me motorcycles. So I got toy motorcycles, and I really should have grabbed my tiny hands, because then you'd be like, oh girl, those are some big motorcycles with my tiny hands. But imagine this motorcycle with the little blue guy. This, I know, next week, will it be more serious? Probably not. Please keep coming back. It'd be lonely if I had to do the study all by myself. Well, Rob would come. He's good for that. But this guy is my sound reasoning. So imagine that I burn my life to the ground filled with pain and humiliation and suffering. And man, I've got all these things. Man, I've got that knowledge of myself. I've got that threat of commitment, the threat of losing things that I want. So this little race car gets a head start. Man, it is way, way, way ahead. Now, this little motorcycle is not a race car. This little motorcycle is like the mental obsession. And you see, what I don't realize is this little motorcycle, it's got turbo boosters, it's got nitrous, it's got like NOS. And it is, yeah, fast and furious. Like if that's a good visual for you, like when I think Toretto or the Vin Diesel guy, and he flips the switch and it goes faster. It's like NOS. I don't know. That's what the obsession of the mind has. And you see, I put down the drink and I'm like, ooh, I put down the drug and I'm chugging away. I'm going to meetings. I'm going to the gym. I'm focusing on all these things, focusing on work. And it is just a matter of time. A matter of time. I love that there's somebody that's going to be entering the meeting right now and like, welcome to the Big Book Study, motorcycles from. I'm sorry. It is only a matter of time before this motorcycle, the insane thought wins. And when I can see this visual, that it doesn't matter how far ahead this one gets, man, I'm sitting in a race car bed and I'm up against a race car. I will drink again. That is the thrust of and what we're trying to get from that paragraph. I will relapse, and it is a race. And that is why I talk about, like, I put down the drink, I put down the drug, I put down the compulsive behavior, and that race begins. I've got a window of willingness, as I call it, or as everyone's talking about in the chat, a window of opportunity. Check it out Thursday night, where I am willing to take actions. And if I take enough of the spiritual actions that I allow God to work in my life, man, that stops the race. It's not about trying to use more willpower, trying to use more self-knowledge, because that will not work. I can't win this race. It is impossible. But how do I stop the race? And how do I stop the race? Is I have a spiritual awakening. And I've got to move quickly and thoroughly because I need a spiritual awakening. So I can't cut corners. And I need it quickly because this motorcycle is coming. It's going to get me. By the way, these motorcycles, if you push them, they'll move on their own. It's so much fun. I totally wasn't playing with them on the floor as a 30-something-year-old sort of an adult. Anyhow, so in some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. Anyone here ever go out and say, that's it, F you, F them, F this, F the steps, F her stupid motorcycles that are stupid Big Book Study. If you were feeling the way that I was feeling, you'd have to get whatever too. F it, F it. I'm going to kill myself anyway, so why don't I get high, drunk, whatever brings you to this study. And it says, but even in this type of beginning, we are obliged, which means we have to admit that our justification for a spree, our rationalization, our feelings of jealousy, nervousness, anger, worry, depression, that is insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. In the light of what always happened. See, I'm trying to escape my problems. And man, you don't understand. I've got capital P problems. They're on me. But what I am trying to do to escape my problems, and I can see it in you, I can't see it in me, it makes my problems worse. And I can't see it when the obsession's on me. It's insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. And that insanely insufficient justification is what we're pointing to is the mental obsession, the obsession of the mind. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, and that deliberately is the F you, F this, F that, instead of casual drinking, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. So in that period where I have the obsession of the mind on me before I take the drink, I'm not capable of seeing the consequences. I am incapable of playing the tape to the end. I'm incapable of remembering my last drunk. And when it says terrific consequences, again, terrific is in reference to the scope. Not as in how terrific these consequences are. I seem to have gone on a bender and found the cure for tuberculosis. Wouldn't you know it? I was smoking crack and I found, I found a wonderful investment strategy. No, not terrific as in the direction, terrific as in the scope. I did have a sponsee one time who she relapsed on crack and then was like, it really helped with my sciatica. And I'm like, we're not going to market this. This is not a solution. I know. I got sciatica too, girl. We're not doing that. So, and actually, that brings us to the hour. And so next week, I was hoping I'd get to it this week, but I'm not surprised we didn't. Next week, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite, the jaywalker. And so I hope you'll join us. And what I will do is I'll stop the recording and we can unmute and say the Serenity Prayer. So thank you.